You've all received, I believe, the distinguished biography of Ron Harris from Austin, Texas here. I'll just run through a few high points. Ron's 55. He's the co-founder and managing director of Harris Preston Partners. It's a private equity firm that's focused on corporate finance and buyout opportunities in mid-market companies. We'll talk a little bit about how that's working in today's storm-tossed markets.
Yeah.
But there is something more, and I hope we'll be able to get into that. Ron and his partner invest in the people as well as in the business. And their goal is to be both economically successful and spiritually significant.
You bet.
We'll talk about how that works. Ron majored in computer science at Vanderbilt, went on to earn an MBA with honors from the University of Texas. He started and led successful high-tech companies in Florida and Texas. He chaired the San Antonio branch of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. Ron's also involved in a group that helps Chinese Christians. Ron and I went to Beijing together a couple of years ago, and you can ask him questions about that, and maybe I'll ask them too. Ron also chairs a poverty fighting group in Austin called Community New Start, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions for him, but I'll start off with one of my own. When you were a junior or senior in college, as most of the students are here, did you have this illustrious career mapped out?
Not at all. No, first of all, it doesn't seem that illustrious sitting here, but no, I actually was probably what you would call one of the worst people in the class. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I knew it. I had an instinct that it had something to do entrepreneurial, but I really didn't have any idea what that meant in detail. So really, I think at that point in my life, I was trying to get through college. But then I also recognized that college was a pretty cool place to be. So by the second semester of my senior year at Vanderbilt, myself and a number of our friends realized we were about to graduate. We had kind of messed up and accumulated enough hours to graduate. We actually walked around campus with black armbands on for the semester, just indicating our distaste for the fact that we're going to leave the comforts of college and go out into the free enterprise, which was a little bit scary. But God has a way of working those things out, so it worked out quite nicely.
But at that time, and correct me if I've misunderstood, at that time you really didn't have much of a belief in God.
Had virtually none, to be honest. I grew up in a Christian home, so to speak. I was kind of that observant kid that recognized that what was said and what was done, both inside the home and outside the home, sometimes the dots didn't connect, and had gone through my own decision process of basically viewing Christianity as pretty much a crutch that my parents seemed to lean on, especially my mom. But it really didn't have a foundation that I thought was based in truth or meaning. And I held that view until a number of years later.
And so you start out and you're looking for a job. How do you find your first job?
It found me. I coming out of Vanderbilt, it was a time when the computer industry was absolutely in its infancy. So you really didn't have to go very far for people to recruit you. And so I actually had the luxury of looking at a number of different assignments, and Texas Instruments came to Vanderbilt recruiting, and they asked me to come down to Austin, Texas and take a look at their facility there, and so I flew down and interviewed with them. And I came back and told my friends that the job at TI I'd give kind of like a B or a C, but this little town of Austin, I'd give an A+ to. It was a little college town. This was in the 70s, 1970s, not 1870s. And it was just a little college town with a little music business and not much more. And I thought it had great potential. So I moved to Austin and took the job as quick as I could.
And then, so you were in Austin for a while, and then over to Florida. And was it natural in a new industry, essentially, to be thinking entrepreneurially?
Well, I think so. In the tech industry made facilitated entrepreneurial thinking quite easily because there was so much innovation occurring so quickly, and you had the emergence of companies like Microsoft, which was still a very, very small company, and the personal computer. I can honestly remember the day it was launched and announced. So those kind of changes were occurring very quickly. TI sent me back to school at UT to get my MBA, and that was a fabulous experience. It really helped connect a lot of business dots for me that were really still disconnected. And I knew coming out of that program that I wanted to try my hand at starting a company, and that I wouldn't rest until I either succeeded or failed at it.
And so for students who, say, are majoring in business, but they don't have that high-tech background, and maybe some of them are going into more traditional industries like wedding planning, how do you think entrepreneurially then, if you're in an old industry?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, I think you have to be careful about the term entrepreneur and the notion of entrepreneurism, because it's kind of a trendy topic and a trendy label, and I think you got to be careful. Not everybody is geared toward entrepreneurism, and it's not like if I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm not going to be successful in business. So it's really not cut out for everyone, and that's okay. And so you have to really like the idea of putting yourself at great risk. You have to be comfortable with that. So often, a lot of it, I've given the advice to many people of if you compare it to riding a roller coaster. If you ride a roller coaster and you really get sick at your stomach and feel like you never want to do this again, you don't ride roller coasters. And but if you do ride the roller coaster and you're the one who raises your hands up through the whole time and you finish and you can't wait to do it again, then you're probably cut out for it. And that's really not unlike the world of startup companies. They're hard, they're very difficult, and they're stressful, and they're not for everybody. And it's perfectly reasonable to go to work in a company and build a career within an existing company versus go through the pain and the stress of starting one. But you'll ultimately begin to sense what's right for you, and that's what I was able to do as well.
Okay, so you have an opportunity then to go to Florida, right? How does that develop?
Well, came out of MBA school, and my friend at TI, who ultimately became one of my partner in our business in Florida, we began to get together over coffee or breakfast or dinner or any moment and start thinking about ideas for companies in the tech space. And again, in this period of time, you didn't have to be Einstein or Bill Gates to come up with a winning company idea. The industry was growing extremely fast. There was innovation happening every day, and so you could kind of bring your half game to the table and still be successful. And so we began to develop business plans and send them to various venture capital firms and request seed financing funding to build this company. And we were rejected about 99.9% of the time. And finally, we submitted a plan, and my partner was kind of in the lead on this one, and we began to compare notes through a venture capitalist with a group in Florida who had put together a similar plan. We didn't know each other, and as those plans began to get integrated into a single plan, it was an opportunity to team up and start this company and see if we could build it. And then the question became, do we locate in South Florida or Austin, Texas? And we lost. And so we lost for good reason. Quite honestly, we were recruiting pretty heavily at the time out of IBM's facility in Boca Raton, Florida. And so it only made sense for us on pure business reasons to be as close to that as we could, given the nature of that business. So we picked up and moved to Florida.
Okay, so you're there, and that became very successful.
It did, yeah. Just just so you know, it was not easy. It failed more times than it succeeded early on. We ran out of money several times. They about closed our doors. I can give you a lot of examples, but I won't. But I say that just to make sure you know it wasn't it wasn't easy by any sense. And we were down and depressed and pretty much thought we were dead about 3 or 4 times. But then through that, we were able to tune the business plan, tune the product, tune the marketing and sales, and make it work.
And then how do you manage to get back to God's country, Austin, Texas?
Right. My wife was a native Austinite, and when I, first of all, if you're married and you were pursuing an entrepreneurial track, the first thing you have to realize is that decision to pursue it is not yours alone. It's a family decision. And so when we got to the point where we saw the opportunity to be funded, I sat down with my wife and we talked about my desire to try to do this, and she was very supportive of that. And then I said, well, we need to do this in South Florida. And her response was, as a native Austinite, her response was, we, you, and who else? And so I made her a deal, and the deal was win, lose, or draw. We will come back to Austin and live, because that's what we both wanted to do. But I needed to scratch this itch, and this was the best chance I had to do it. And so she was very supportive of that, and so we picked up and moved to Florida and started the company.
And how long have you been married now?
About 25 years. Yeah.
Hardship years in Florida.
Yeah, hardship years in Florida. It was tough on her at times. It was tough on me, but we made it.
And when do you come back to Austin?
We came back to Austin. We moved down there in the late 80s. We came back to Austin in the mid-90s.
Mid-90s. Okay, and you have a new company at that point.
Right. Well, we came back without any prospects, quite honestly. Our company in Florida is called Citrix. Citrix got up and going. We took it public. It was rocking and rolling, and so we said, we're leaving.
Without any prospects, but with some capital.
Got a little capital, but with no prospects of what to do next, except probably come back and start another company. But didn't know what that was, or didn't know what it looked like. But came home and liked being home, and I immediately began working and looking at what's the next opportunity I could pursue. And I had a couple of good business plans I had in mind, and then teamed up with some other folks, and we ended up buying a division out of Novell. Novell had a number of different product groups and product divisions within their company, and we had some knowledge about one division that they didn't place much value on, and we could see how it could be a big hit if you marketed it differently and built it up differently, which is classic entrepreneur 101. And we were able to approach Novell through some contacts, senior management, and convince them to sell us that, basically diversify that division from the company and sell it to us. We paid them some cash, and we gave them equity in this company we were creating that they immediately valued at zero. And then we took that division and turned it into a private company and built it up and took it public and grew it. And Novell looked one day, and that equity that they put to zero was worth a whole lot of money.
And so at that point, what's driving you? I mean, you have economic success. You still don't have much of a belief in God, right?
I don't, no. At that point is when I really began reevaluating my own life, because in a nutshell, what I had grown up believing from kind of high school age on was that the real purpose and meaning of life was to be successful. And I looked at that with as much objectivity as I could have. With a platform of success, that would allow you to change the world in positive ways. I would have claimed then that it wasn't purely a selfish motivation. It was from that perspective, maybe you could do some good that you couldn't do otherwise. But what occurred to me was, after taking the first company public and seeing your net worth increase pretty dramatically, and then the second, it just didn't feel particularly meaningful. It quite honestly felt just the opposite. So I remember telling my wife, I've gone through my adult life to date knowing exactly where I am and where I want to go and what I want to accomplish until now. And now I have no idea what's next. I wasn't particularly thrilled with the idea of trying to solely grow the company quarter after quarter, year after year. That was interesting and challenging. But, in that period of time, you could look at the Fortune 500, and over the past decade, that group of 500 companies, 280 of them no longer existed at the start of that decade versus at that point in time. So it didn't seem meaningful necessarily to try to grow this company as your legacy in life. That felt pretty empty. And so I just began really thinking about and wondering what is it all about? So.
Okay.
So
and what happened?
Well, I had some Christian friends.
This is in the mid-'90s?
This was mid to late 90s. That one in particular said, "Ron, here's the deal." He said, "We're multidimensional people. We're created as multidimensional people." He said, "with a personal life, a professional life, and a spiritual life." He said, "The problem is you're a single dimension person. You just have a professional life. That's it. And until you recognize that you're multidimensional and that your joy comes from more than just your professional life, you're never really going to be happy." And I thought about that for a minute, and my first response was, go back to that part where you said we're created. You really, really honestly believe we're created? And his response was, you really honestly believe you came from a monkey? And I said, well, gosh, I don't know. That's what I learned in school. And he said, but did you ever, he said, you made your whole life of challenging conventional wisdom. You built companies by challenging conventional wisdom. Literally, both companies we built, everyone that read our plan said, this isn't going to work. But we made it work. He said, so you've built your reputation by challenging conventional wisdom, and here you are taking fundamentally the most important decision and sort of most important thing in your life, and you're just taking it for granted. It's just not like you. And so, long story short, it kind of guilted me into saying, well, why don't you go do the due diligence on evolution versus creation with intellectual honesty, without spiritual theory whatsoever. Just do due diligence on that. And if you conclude from that with intellectual honesty that you came from a monkey through a matter of chance and time and randomness, then so be it. And on the other hand, if you conclude that it was something greater than that, then go with that. Well, that was, that's probably the worst thing he could have told me, because, he knew that I would just kind of spend a lot of time thinking about that. And, of course, now I understand that, God was working on me in a pretty big way. And so I began to read all the available material, and, I literally ended up reading microbiology textbooks. It was a period. My wife grew up in the Catholic Church, by the way, and she hadn't been practicing Catholicism through our marriage, but she had been praying about me because she wanted to re-engage with the church, and she wanted her own spiritual life. But I didn't really care if she had or didn't. But I didn't realize at the time that she had been praying for me. Well, a typical night sitting around at home, we were all watching TV except me sitting in my chair reading a college-level microbiology book, going, this is crazy, this is incredible. Our bodies at the microbiology level, at the cellular level, are just amazing. And, again, I won't spare you all the details, but I read Behe's book on Darwin's black box. I read Dembski's book on intelligent design. I read all the material I could get my hands on. And it just became overwhelmingly clear to me that, this evolution thing was garbage. It had absolutely no scientific foundation whatsoever. And that clearly there was a miraculous creation. So, I'd been to church, so I'd done that drill and all that, but I'd never really opened my mind and my heart to the idea of a personal relationship with your Creator. Until throughout that, at some point, it just was overwhelming to me, and just bowed my head and said, with my wife, and said, God, I have no idea who you are. I have no idea how I got here. I have no idea where all this is leading, but I know you've got to be real, because I know I didn't come from a monkey. And then the magnitude of miraculous events that created us and sustain us is beyond anyone's understanding. I mean, the single living cell is not only more complicated than any computer we've ever built, and I know a lot about that, it's far more complicated than any computer we ever thought about building. And Darwin, in his book, which I read as well, he just talked about this simple living cell. He had no idea what he was talking about in terms of its complexity. So that started a journey for me that has led me to where I am today only by the grace of God. So, if C.S. Lewis was, brought into the kingdom kicking and screaming, I was pretty much brought into the kingdom, not necessarily kicking and screaming, but clearly the skeptic who couldn't believe that this notion of a miraculous creation and a sovereign God was real until, by the grace of God, you have eyes to see and ears to hear.
So it's interesting that it was really an intellectual apprehension.
It really was. It wasn't, and I that's been so helpful for me in talking to my friends and associates and my colleagues, because, first of all, at the end of the day, you end up, I believe, recognizing that the choice to follow Christ and recognize His sovereignty ultimately has little, if anything, to do with the intellectual side, because that's so weighted toward creation, toward God. It really is ultimately about your own will. There's no question in my mind it has less to do with the facts, because I think the facts are overwhelming. It has more to do with your own will. And I'm a particular believer in the fact that we are called and part of God's kingdom long before we make that decision. He's made it for us, and so I was fortunate, I think, to be part of that elect and feel His power.
So it's interesting. The people on the atheistic side tend to refer to, they use one term that's become common in the past few years, faith-based, and then they tend to refer to themselves as the reality-based community.
Right.
Saying that, let's say, evangelical thought, it's all based on heart and emotion,
right.
and against rationality.
You bet.
You came into it exactly the opposite way.
Exactly the opposite way, and I think again, after receiving Christ and really beginning to build my own Christian life, I remember reading one of R.C. Sproul's book, Power of the Holy Spirit, real short book, a great read. I would recommend you read it in a day or so. But Sproul talks about how his first day in seminary, he was blown away by the first thing the professor put on the board. And he said he put 3 words on the board and then walked out of the room. And the 3 words were, regeneration precedes faith. And kind of stop and shake your head and scratch your head and go, regeneration precedes faith. Regeneration precedes faith. Well, we could spend the rest of the night on those 3 words as they were. And obviously what Sproul theologically is communicating to you is that there is an elect and that you are actually regenerated in order to have faith. And the book describes that in some detail. And I think that's very, very true. So I think that will is ultimately the deciding factor, and I think that will is ultimately driven by the Holy Spirit or not.
Now, when you go through this change, what effect does that have? Well, first of all, let me just ask, okay, family. So
yeah.
So Suzanne, how does she respond to this, and then just tell us a bit about your kids by that point.
Yeah. So Suzanne is emotionally very, very pleased, and our relationship takes on a completely different meaning. I mean, it's not like we go into nirvana or anything, but it's like a dimension of our lives has opened up that was never opened before. And so we began searching for a church and talking about how we're going to raise our kids and having a different level of dialogue. Now, throughout this time, I had been building 2 companies, and so my time at home was pretty short. I had 2 million frequent flyer miles on one airline and 1 million on another, and I was gone a lot. And our kids were very young. And just to give you an idea, my youngest one day, just before this all came about, I was on the board of a company in Japan, Tokyo, Japan, and I called my wife and said, good news, the board meeting finished early, I'll take the earlier flight home. She said, well, Ron, it's a good thing. This morning, Catherine, our youngest, at the breakfast table, said, Mom, is Dad coming over this weekend? And she said, well, Kath, Dad lives here. And she said, well, I know, but is he coming over? And at the time, she was probably 3 or 4 years old. And my wife just said, you think about that on the way home. So, of course, that was the longest plane flight in eternity, getting home. But so I was CEO of our second company at the time, and the change was pretty dramatic in me. Again, it wasn't nirvana, but it was change. It was transformation. So one thing, I was pretty mean CEO. I mean, I took no prisoners, and we can talk a little bit about that tonight because it's important. But I had one bad habit. Well, I had a lot of them, but one in particular, which was if someone didn't do their job well, I would call them out in public and say, look, Marvin, you blew it. And, here's what I wanted you to do. Here's what you did. Here's the miss. I can't understand how you could miss that badly. And honestly, I had been schooled by none other than Bill Gates. We had a relationship Citrix had a relationship with Microsoft for years. And in Microsoft, there was always this fear in meetings of you be careful or you're going to be billed. And billed was Gates walks in the back of the room while you're giving your presentation, let's say on the launch of Windows, and he asks you about 1 million detailed questions about your launch, and if you can't answer them with great proficiency, you're toast. And so I thought that's a good way to make sure the employees know what you expect out of them, sets high standards. But you don't have to beat them to death in public, right? And that's what I was doing too much. And so, I actually went to a number of people and apologized. Said, I was a jerk, and I want you to know I'm sorry. And so I think I was as hard a CEO in terms of the results I expected, but I think I was a little more cognizant of the fact that we're people, and we should treat each other accordingly. And then, quite honestly, in the tech boom and then bust, I remember our stock dropped dramatically, and probably before I was a Christian, I would have come close to wanting to jump out the nearest window because that was my whole life. But now I could see it through much larger eyes. And I remember assembling the company and said, we've taken a big hit, but we're gonna survive this. And in the grand scheme of things, guys, our stock price isn't the most important thing in life, and that was just unheard of for people to hear that coming from me. So, I think the transformations are real in people. I've experienced it and I've seen it in others. It doesn't mean that things go right. It just means that you have, an eternal perspective now where you didn't before.
And so now as you invest in various companies, you're investing money, you're also investing time.
Right.
How does that work?
Well, this venture now is the third venture that we started and run, and I needed to get off the road, so I basically came to the board as CEO of the company and said, look, I'm going to recruit my replacement. I'm going to be chairman of the board until my tenure is up, and then I'm going to fade out of the picture because I need some time to rebuild the fabric of my relationship with my family. And that again, you can't fully appreciate how unusual that was for them to hear, but very unusual. So when they, their jaws were on the floor, and when all that came down, took some time off. I thought I was going to take 90 days off, basically a summer, and then start something new. And I spend a lot of time now at this point praying about it. I'd take walks in the morning and just use those walks as time to pray about, God, what do you want me to do? I'll do anything now. But I'll tell you what I'd really like to do, what I'd really like to do is start one more venture with a Christian partner. I've never worked with a Christian male or female in my life, and really be a spiritually significant company, whatever that means. And I just prayed about that a lot. And 90 days turned into 120, which turned into 180, which turned into a year, which turned into 2 years, which turned into 3 years, turned into 4 years. 4 years later. And this is just God, this is just classic God working in your life. 4 years later, I had a number of opportunities to get involved, take over. People would call me, you got to come run this company, come run that company. And I'd pray about it. I go, it's not right. I was anxious to do something. My wife was anxious to get me out of the house, but I just didn't feel like I'd dialed into what it was that I was supposed to do. And literally, I had a good buddy at our church, and he and I had been doing some investing along the side on different opportunities to invest. I'd accumulated some capital, and we started talking about building a firm, and that would do private equity investments alongside of other private equity institutions. And as we talked about it, and it just began to roll out, it was just clearly in my mind I had found what God wanted me to do. It just fit like hand in glove. And by the way, it was exactly what I'd been praying about. But also, it was more than what I'd been praying about. It was what I'd been praying about, and it was a lot more. And I couldn't be happier.
So how does it work when you find an interesting company, you see there's not only an economic challenge there, but a spiritual challenge?
Yeah.
How do you start working?
Well, we're the first thing we do, and I would encourage you guys to do, the first thing we do when we enter into a new relationship, even before we've decided to make an investment, is we get to know the company and the management team. We make sure that early on in the relationship, we brand ourselves as Christian businessmen. And we do that very intentionally, because once you make it clear to the people you're interacting with that you are a Christian with a biblical worldview, it takes the pressure off the relationship in some ways, in the sense that we'll start meals with, if we take them out to lunch, we'll start the meal with a prayer. We'll start board meetings with a prayer. We'll make it clear to them that we have a biblical worldview. And what I mean by taking the pressure off that, if we just opened up in a prayer, they're kind of confused. We're at a restaurant and you open up, okay, well, what are you going to do? Well, we go beyond that and said, we'd like to bless the food, and then of course they'll kind of look shocked and go, okay, I guess. But then following that, we'll just say, part of our whole gig is that we think, God has put us here intentionally, and it's not like we think we're going to see a burning bush at the restaurant, but it means that that's an important part of who we are. And so generally we brand ourselves that way. And from that point on, what you find out is that people begin to share their own spiritual experiences with you now much more openly. And so I'd really encourage you to do that. It's an amazing the difference in the relationship that kicks off almost immediately and automatically. And then if we move into the stage where we make an investment and start working with them, I can guarantee you that as you start working with a management team on a company, either established or early stage, either one, there is a world of issues that arise. Some of them are personal, some of them are professional, But that management team that we interact with, because we generally will sit on the board or at least be very closely associated with the team, we're close enough to see issues that arise. Let me give you a couple quick examples. We have an oil and gas company that we own in Texas, of course. Doesn't everyone own an oil and gas Texas? And you don't, yeah. We'll get one for Marvin too. And very competent team. Two gentlemen who've been in what is referred to as the oil patch for many, many, many years and successful in it. Co-founders of the company. We funded it, and the company's out looking for that zillion-dollar field of oil or gas. Well, there's enormous issues that come into play, and again, we let them know up front that as Christian businessmen, we believe in the sovereignty of God, and as the sovereignty of God doesn't mean we know that this company will be successful. We're clear in our view that we said, look, and we have a biblical worldview, and by the way, if you take a close look at the Bible, you see a whole lot more disasters than anything. So it's not like we're saying that because we believe in the sovereignty of God, this is a shoe-in. It just means that we believe that God oversees who we are and what we're doing. And in this particular case, these co-founders, and this is very common, ultimately began to disagree with each other and start to fight with each other, both publicly and privately. And it becomes a very big problem within the company. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to come in and try to be the peacemakers and do so with both professional integrity as well as with spiritual integrity. And at the same time this was going on, the wife of the CEO was diagnosed with a heart condition, and a very serious heart condition. And as he began to understand who we are as Christian businessmen, he began to share more about his spiritual life, and I would say that I would put him in the nominal Christian category of kind of sort of believing in God and kind of sort of going to church, but probably not the kind of personal relationship with Christ that I thought he could have. And so we would talk about that difference. And I remember when he let us know that his wife had a serious heart condition, he asked us to pray for her on the phone. Would you stop and pray for her? That was a major step for him, and an example, I think, of how our relationship transcended business. And so we look for those opportunities to make the business world successful, but to transcend the business world and make sure that the person understands that there's a bigger picture. And it helps when we've been down the path and I can say, yeah, I've been in your shoes and we've grown up the companies and we've made some good money out of it. But I can tell you there's a lot of potholes in the road, and I can also tell you when you get to the end of the road and there's that pot of gold, it's not all that it's cracked up to be. It's not all that it's cracked up to be. And that there's something that's really a lot more important. So we share that view with them. We don't jam it down their throats. We don't do anything other than be very credible businessmen with a biblical worldview.
So when you wake up on Monday morning, are you excited, or are you saying?
Yeah, when I wake up on Monday morning, I think I've died and gone to heaven in my career. I think 95% of the business world would love to be in the position to do the things we do, frankly, and I don't mean that arrogantly. I mean it's just a privilege. We get to work with companies of all shapes and sizes, all different industries, very innovative guys, and both men and women doing very interesting things, and we get to invest in them as well as in their business and experience those opportunities to. For us, we would never make an investment because we thought there was a spiritual opportunity and no economic opportunity. We believe, first and foremost, we make investments because we have investors that depend on us. We make investments based on the credibility of the business and the business plan. But in the process, of making that investment in the business, we recognize that God's always going to give you a bigger platform. And while you're out there thinking that you're blessing the person in classic biblical style, you realize you're the one being blessed.
But let's open it up for questions, and they can be questions about calling, about careers, about the current roller coaster on Wall Street, anything. You can just call on people as you see fit.
Yes, sir. Back room.
My name is Matt Meisinger. I had well, first off, thank you for coming.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Quick question of clarification. You said that when you start talking with the company, you make it obvious that you're Christian. Is that just? Do you mean you do that just like when you're sitting down at the table through that conversation, or do you make it? Is it more upfront than that? I was a little unclear on when you introduce that.
Well, we generally introduce it through prayer at the first opportunity to pray together. That's what we found to be the most meaningful. It throws people for a loop at first. I mean, it's really kind of funny. We've got some guys that kind of go, "You want to pray for this meal?" You know, and Austin is a pretty liberal town, by the way. And so you get, we're in the minority. So you kind of get deer in the headlight stares at first, and then from that, we said, well, I hope that doesn't offend you. For us, prayer is a very important thing and then that's just a lead-in to be able to tell them a little bit more about our perspective on life. And generally, in those first few meetings, it's received a little tentatively, and I think most people, whether they be atheist, agnostic, or nominal Christian, we quite honestly, I can't say that there's, can I say this, that there's any companies in our portfolio where I felt like there were strong Christians when we arrived. Wish I could. But it's tentative at first because they don't know what that means in terms of the relationship and that they might be entering into with you, or are you the kind of guy that's going to be prophesying over their head every day, or they don't know what that means. So we try to make sure they understand that for us, we're normal guys that believe that there is a truth that transcends what conventional wisdom would have you to believe, but that in the process we're still normal guys. We take them out, we go hunting, we do all the things normal guys do, but we do it with a recognition that we are privileged to be created and to know our Creator. Yes, sir, John.
During a tumultuous time in the market, how do you still defend the free market? How do you say this is still the best way to go?
Yeah. Well, I had the pleasure of meeting John over dinner here as well, so we talked a little bit about this, but it's difficult to defend free markets other than say if you look at history of where we've allowed free markets to work, they work. And I was very privileged to be appointed to the Federal Reserve Board. It was a ball, and it was really a blast. And I got to meet a lot of really much smarter people than me, including former Chairman Greenspan, and I learned a lot from it. And but it was really confirming a lot of what I had instinctively and academically come to know and believe, and that is that free markets are painful. So we talked about at dinner. They dole out their level of pain. They dole out their level of benefit. They don't discriminate. They do it to anybody and everybody as necessary. But generally speaking, if you let free markets work, they float all boats. They really do. And it's a far better solution than letting a government, ours or otherwise, try to fix it. Because what happens is the government will fix the symptom, not the problem, generally speaking. Not because they're bad guys, not because they're not trying to do it. It's just difficult. And so if you allow the free markets to work, they'll fix the problem. But it might fix it in ways that you hadn't fully accounted for. But it will drive a more efficient solution. So what I try to argue, John, is generally speaking, economies work when the consumer has the power. Economies work when consumers hold the power. They work most efficiently when consumers hold the power. They begin to be more and more inefficient when you take more and more of the power away from the consumer. When the consumer can choose, when the consumer can bet with their dollars, with their time, with their energy, when that dynamic begins to work, it works very efficiently. Examples of where it doesn't work as well right now is our healthcare system. Our healthcare system, the power rests too much with the insurance companies. And so the insurance companies get to tell you which doctor to go to and how much they're going to pay the doctor. And so what we have, among other things, is more and more smart people who would otherwise enter pre-med and medical school don't want to go there anymore. So it has unintended consequences that sometimes can be dramatic. The other is school. You ought to be able to send your kid to whatever school you want to, right? When you guys ultimately are out of school, married, and have your own families, it only makes sense to send your child to whatever school you want to send them to. And if you had that power, then the schools would respond by making sure that they gave the highest quality of education possible so that they could recruit your children. But when the government tells you go to this school, and the government mean the local government, not necessarily national, then free markets are constrained artificially. So what we're witnessing over the past 10 days here is the free markets melting down the financial services industry. It's melting it down like that. And Lehman Brothers is a 150-year-old company that's gone through 2 world wars and Great Depression and many cycles, market cycles, and it survived all of that, but it didn't survive the credit crunch. And yes, you could have said, well, if the government was going to step in and help Bear Stearns and help AIG, why wouldn't they help Lehman? Well, Henry Paulson, who's our Secretary of Treasury, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, is a free market guy himself. So he believes in those very strongly. I think Bear Stearns' support was generally thrust on him at the 9th hour. Didn't really have time to react to that. Bear Stearns got into a big jam really quick in terms of disclosing that to the public. So I think the government had to respond quickly because it was very challenging to let a company go down the tube quite that quickly and have its response in the market, not knowing how the markets would respond. In the case of Lehman Brothers, an investment banking company, quite honestly, the right thing to do was exactly what they did. Let her go. And it is very painful. Imagine Lehman's thousands of employees, most of them, I guarantee you, had their savings and retirement in Lehman stock, which I think today traded at 2 cents. It's gone. So not unlike the employees of Enron, who saw their savings and retirement disappear. So that's where that's where the free markets inject the pain. But in the case of AIG, I think the tentacles into the U.S. market are just too deep, principally in insurance. They have a number of different businesses and lines of business, but their insurance business just touches way too many consumers for the government to have let it drop. But Paulson, being a smart guy, put together a deal that I think ultimately the taxpayers are going to make money on. Because if you've read the fine print, which is hard to do because it rarely gets the coverage, we didn't give them $85 billion. We gave them a line of credit from which they can draw down up to $85 billion. And furthermore, for putting that line of credit in place, they had to give us 80% equity of the company. Well, that's genius. That's Henry Paulson, the genius. And so the U.S. Treasury now owns AIG, owns virtually 80% of it. And then on top of that, he said, and if you call down the capital, called a capital call in our circles, call down any portion of that $85 billion, that portion that you pull down, we're going to charge you 11+% interest. Well, so what Paulson said is that I'm going to support you because I think your tentacles are far too long and deep to let you go, but I'm going to sure make you pay. And by the way, I'm going to send a signal to everybody else that if anybody else is out there thinking they're going to get a free ride, they better double think it. And so I think there's an interesting balance, but certainly I think we're seeing an unprecedented restructure on Wall Street in a matter of a week or two, which is the classic nature of a free market. It does its own thing, its own speed.
I just ask, we hear a lot about short sellers and so forth. Is that a problem?
Well, again, I think short selling is a problem in terms of disclosure. I don't think it's a problem in terms of the process itself. That's, selling a stock you don't own and then buying it. You believe it's overpriced, so you sell it at the price, at today's price, which you think is inflated, and you're risking that you're right and the price is going to go down. Then you're going to buy it at a lower price to cover the sale you did earlier. And so it's a classic technique, and I don't have any problem at all with the technique. I think that our disclosure rules around shorting need to be improved, and that's the SEC proposal that's been placed on the table now to make sure. And hedge funds, quite honestly, are the major short sellers on the planet. They have most of the capital and most of the power. To have them be a little bit more forthcoming about the short selling they're doing. But I personally don't think there's a problem with allowing short selling in the market. It's not all that different from long trades, but it can be, disclosure would begin to put a governance on it that I think would be helpful to keep it under control. Yes, sir.
Just a little bit more along the same lines of what we're talking about. You talked about symptoms versus fundamental issues.
Yeah.
Today the Dow Jones went up about 400 points. I read in the news that it was mainly because of reassurances
Mhm.
of a long-term government solution.
Yep.
And just being from this school and taking the economics classes, the professors that I've had, I'm sort of skeptical of that sort of approach. And I guess
Good.
the investors on Wall Street and I guess the optimism, is that rooted in a misunderstanding of the fundamental problems versus the symptoms of what's wrong? And I guess more specifically, what do you think the fundamental issue with our market is right now? What's the underlying thing that's making our financial institutions crumble like this?
Well, let's unpack that one. First of all, what's causing the financial institutions to get smoked and restructured is basically decisions that were made years ago, right? So they're paying the price today for a decision that was made in the boardroom and in the operating group of the senior management over the last 5+ years, and that is choosing to take part in a free credit market when there was no such thing as free credit. And so we got real drunk and disorderly within the financial services business by saying, as the Fed dropped interest rates, and I was happy to be part of the Fed during the years where we were dropping them and was very supportive of dropping them. We dropped them to low levels that I've never seen before that in my lifetime. But as we dropped those rates, then we began to, as a financial services industry, began to package mortgage securities. We began to offer loans to people to buy property, primarily homes, that they could not afford. They could not afford, and so what we were able to do as an industry was say, you can buy this home on this, in essence, on this mortgage note, which you'll just have to pay interest only. It'll be a balloon note that'll be due in 5 or 10 years, and pay interest only on that note, and we'll even make it a below prime rate interest level because it's all going to escalate in the future to catch up. And everybody will be happy because by the time you get to the point where you have to refinance, your property would have appreciated to a large extent anyway. And so you'll get the value of that equity of the appreciation, so your refinance will be a lot easier and you'll be able to afford it easier than you can today. So that was the theory, and we did that as an industry a zillion times to a zillion people who were buying homes that they couldn't afford. And so the people were attracted to buying a home that was beyond their means. The financial services market said, we'll support you in the process. But then it's not at all unusual for those mortgage securities to, first of all, that mortgage paper to be sold from one bank to another, from one institution to another. But then we said, okay, well, if I package them up and make it a package of mortgage securities, I can turn that into a security itself that has the diversification of a number of different mortgage papers in it, and I can price it. And so that in itself began a spiral that was out of control, because when you package that up, first of all, you got to put a price on it. Well, what are you going to charge for it? Well, so then we had the complicity of the ratings groups. So we had Standard & Poor's and Moody's walk in and say, we need you to rate this security. This is a new security. We want you to rate it. And by the way, we need your rating to at least be A, or if not AA. And so this is where we need you to engineer the answer, right? So we want you to rate it, but we know what the rating's got to be. And so you had complicity among the lenders. You had complicity among the title companies who were issuing deeds to people for houses that they really couldn't afford. Then you had complicity among the financial markets to put that into a security. Then you had complicity among the rating services to put a rating on it. And then you had basically created an economy. You had created an economy, a little sub-economy of subprime mortgage notes. And that was working completely on the expectation of future value of this security, and its current value was propped up by that expectation only, not by fundamentals. And so you roll that tape forward to this year, and really to last year, and you finally start having people raise their hand, going, you know, Marvin sold it to me, and I marked it up and sold it to you. And then you wanted to mark it up and sell it to somebody else, and somebody finally said, this thing's not worth what you're trying to sell it to me for. What is it worth? And then it started, you know, unraveling a little bit, because everybody said, well, I don't know what it's worth. Moody put an A on it, and Moody said, well, I put an A on it because you told me to put an A. You know, and everybody started doing this and realizing that the people who own the homes that were behind this were at best able to pay their interest rate, and sometimes not even that. So, you know, the bottom began to fall. And then as the bottom fell, we find ourselves now with an economy that we had created artificially for a security that we had valued artificially based on complicity from the markets that had agreed on that value. And then everyone began, just as quickly as they agreed to it, immediately began to say, this thing's worthless. And that's how we got into that jam. Now, that means a lot of people have been foreclosed on homes that they should have never been sold, and that's real painful for the people. And but they should have never been in that house to begin with. So that's the reality of that. What I think is important to your overall question now, the Dow comes up 400 points. Let's think about a couple of things. One is the financial services industry and the credit markets now are a mess, and the credit is very, very tight. And if you notice this morning, the Fed, before the markets opened, released $250 billion worth of U.S. dollars into the worldwide economy through the central bank here, central bank in Brussels and in Japan. That's primarily to just loosen up dollars, to loosen up credit, because credit right now is extremely hard to get. If you wanted to go get a loan for a car or a home or a popsicle, you're going to have a tough time. It's just not a lot available. It doesn't mean that there's not dollars out there. It's just that there's not people willing to use their dollars to back up your loan because they don't know how valuable it is. So the Fed uses one of its most important tools, which is the M1 money supply, the liquidity, and puts liquidity into the system in order to try to free up dollars for people to have those that they need. So that has a positive impact on the stock price. Two, outside the financial services business, the market, and you know, this is where McCain made the statement and then everybody hammered him. the market fundamentals are really still reasonably strong outside of financial services. Now, if you said that as a political candidate running for president, you get hammered. But the reality is, if you look at the retail sector, Walmart's at a 52-week high. Target's gone up 30% this year. The retail sector is quite strong. Oracle reported their earnings after the market closed today. They beat the street. Tech sector is looking pretty good. So there are some sectors within our economy that are weathering reasonably well. They're equally important. There's real estate sectors within our nation that are not near as dire as you would read or see on CNN, right? And so collectively, the smart investor is saying, okay, I'm not going to put my money with financial services because I don't know where the bottom of this is. But outside of financial services, there's companies that are meeting or exceeding the street expectations. And they can only do that if their products are in demand, if customers are willing to buy them with real liquidity, and the management team of that company is in pouring that profit back into the company. That's all working. So the result of that, I think, is an uptick in stock. And then last piece is Secretary Paulson has put forth this proposal called restructuring and restarting the Resolution Trust Corporation, which was in the late 80s, early 90s, which, was a entity the government created in order to, in the 80s and 90s, to buy bad assets of savings and loans companies and basically distribute them into the market in an orderly fashion. And Secretary Paulson's proposing that we do that again. That way, there's a lot of reasons behind that would make that meaningful, but bottom line is it's government intervention, but if you're going to intervene, that's probably the right way to do it, because you come on the scene, you perform a service, and then you disappear. Yeah, I read World. We read it at home cover to cover. Yes, ma'am.
Well, Dr. Olasky mentioned asking about calling.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier at a team meeting, we were just having about our desires versus God's desires for our lives.
Right.
And someone said that a lot of times those desires align with each other in ways you don't expect. And I was wondering if you found that to be true in your life.
Yeah, I do, and I would give you this advice that, again, we talked about a little bit over dinner. I've asked all the time, what do you think I ought to do? I'm not happy in my job, or I'm not sure what job I ought to pursue. I'm just out of college, or all sorts of different variations of that theme. And I think there's a couple of things that are really important. One is, let me just summarize it as follow your passion and find your joy. Follow your passion and find your joy. And I think that's both professionally smart and spiritually, that's where your calling's going to come from. And I think the curveball is it could be a totally different direction and a totally different time frame with some intermediate steps involved. And I'll give you, my life is a bit of an example. I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now. I think God prepared me across a number of years, through good times, bad times, through periods of time where I refused Him and turned my back on Him. He brought me through all that, prepared me for what I'm doing now. And I think, in my own opinion, what I'm doing now is what He intended me to do. But I had to be prepared for that. So I had to go through a career of working for employers. I had to go through a career of starting companies. I had to go through a career of great joy at times, great pain at times. I had to get to the point where I could be credible as a private equity investor in the markets. I had to get to the point where I could be credible as chairman of the Federal Reserve Board in San Antonio. I had to get to the point where He prepared the platform which I'm able to stand on today. It's His platform. Put it there. So it's a circuitous route that brought me to where I am. But now, looking back at it, you can see that I believe that those were all steps of preparation to get me where I am today. So I think the beauty of where you guys are is, you have your whole life in front of you. So I think it's an extremely exciting time to do a couple things. One, make sure you stay connected to your Creator. You know, not loosely but tightly, coupled, daily, hourly. You know, recognize that, you know, He can't really work in your life, and He is working. I mean, one of the fundamental principles when it comes to understanding your calling, principle number one is God is at work, period. God is at work. And so knowing that, remember that it's our privilege and our responsibility to stay connected with Him through prayer, through study, and have that relationship. And then I'm a strong believer in making, as part of your prayers, making it clear what you believe your passion is, what you would like to pursue, but then always yielding to God's way. And you know, there's no science in it, but I think in the process, if it's His way for you, I believe that, as I've experienced, you know, sort of the doors open and the things come together that sometimes seems like it's impossible for them all to fit, but they fit. And it might be a different direction than you assumed, but I think it's by far the better approach, the better path.
Let's say there's a period of apprenticeship where you're doing something that's actually pretty boring.
Yep.
You're learning the trade, but it's pretty boring, and you wake up on Monday morning, you're not excited about going to work. How do you know whether to stick with that or whether that's not really your calling and you should jump and go somewhere else?
Yeah, at first I think it's a great question, and I think the main thing is you don't make rush judgments. You know, the first thing you do is say, okay, well, let's say I hate this job. You know, I've landed here and I hate this job. Well, first of all, I would say, okay, let's start looking at ways this job is preparing you. Let's start stepping back and saying, what is it about this job that's really preparing me? And what is it about this job that I really hate, and what can be done about that? And let's pray about that. Let's pray about, you know, what is it that's really hurting? And generally, you can say, most people will say they hate the job, it's their boss. They hate their boss. Well, I think that's a great topic of prayer. And I think you really commit that to prayer. And then I think you also evaluate where the positives of that job come into play and what it could be preparing you for, as Marvin mentioned. And then I would continue there. Then I would also say that you don't stay in a bad job forever, okay? And so while there's a judgment call there, your prayer and your activity is, you know, Lord, help me with this problem, and then also, you know, help me find my way here. And I think He responds to that, you know, and I think first and foremost, He's responding to it because you're honoring Him. It may mean you're staying in a boring job longer than you want, but I think you have to keep your eye on what you're being prepared for, what you're learning. But then I think you also are active to look around at what else is going on and see if those doors open. Remember, when I thought I would be out of work before I started my next company for 90 days, I was out 4 years, and which was beyond my wildest dreams. And when that finally came together, it came together more so by other people's actions, rather than my own. So that was my sense. But I think at the end of the day, I would stress, follow your passion and find your joy is the most important part you pursue. Yes?
Kind of on the same lines as this, where do you find the balance, or how do you determine between, say, what is difficult and what you need to get through versus something that's just a bad thing that's going on?
Right.
Like even just like a plan of action. Where do you say, look, we need to just keep trying, figure out new ways, or is this even working at all, and should we just stop?
Yeah. That's a hard one. I mean, I think, first of all, I don't think it's ever the Lord's will for you to put yourself in an immoral or any kind of illegal, immoral situation. So, I mean, if bad thing means that, you know, there's abuse of any kind, I don't think that's proper. And so if you take that one off the table is, in my mind, a case where you have to take quick action and of yourself or a friend or anyone that you might be associated with. Then I think if it's just bad in the sense of very low satisfaction, very negative environment, then again I think the same principles apply. I think you don't rush to judgment. You don't rush to an answer. I think you commit it to prayer. You spend some time trying to understand what is it that you're learning from this. Again, assuming you're not in any peril or you're not in an immoral situation. What is it that you can be learning from this while praying about the situation? I mean, God's going to put you in difficult times. Job was not having fun. So I don't think the sign that it's difficult is a sign that it's not sovereign, and obviously it is. And so God may be allowing you to go through some tough times. And I think you have to take the same message that Job took, which is what? I know my Redeemer lives. Remember, that's what Job kept telling people. Job, you're a mess, man. You've been beat up. You can't even look at you. You're so ugly. But what did Job say? I know my Redeemer lives. And I think you have to come back to that time and time again. And I think that's the God-honoring part of that. And I know you can imagine, think of how Job must have prayed for, God, take me out of this situation. And so I think as Christians, we have to recognize that we're going to go through those times, that tough time. Sanctification is not easy. Sanctification, becoming more Christ-like, geez Louise, that's a toughie, And sanctification means, in my mind, that you're going to go through a lot of experiences. Some are pretty difficult, and some are very joyous. Marvin and Susan and I know a friend in Austin whose child is suffering with leukemia, aggressive leukemia, and it's a 12-year-old kid, and she's just a doll. But man, she is really, really suffering. And so the family is suffering, but you can see in the parents that message of I know my Redeemer lives.